Hello, everybody. As we digest the November election, one issue that hasn't come up, which should have, which has conveniently been forgotten about for many people, is the impact of money on American politics and American elections. And trust my old friend, Vogl, the man who knows about money. He's been on the show before, Frank Vogl. He's the co-founder of Transparency International, the author of a very interesting book called Enablers. And Frank came out with an important piece in US News called Money Didn't Buy Trump the Election, but gets into the finances of the election. Frank is joining us from Washington, D.C., where he lives and continues to be involved with Transparency International. Frank, one of the things that struck me about the last election is how much money was actually spent, and most of it was actually, seems like, wasted. I mean, Harris, as you know in your piece, I mean, she raised $1.65 billion and yet ran this appalling campaign. How do you make sense of all this?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's a great pleasure. This election had so much money in it, and yet, you know, the total of about 16 billion for all of the elections, state, local, Senate, everything that happened on November 5, was actually about 2 billion less than the 2020 election. Now, back to your question about Harris. I haven't seen a really good breakdown of where exactly all the money went, but I suspect that the Trump campaign was much more effective, strategic in using social media, which cost a lot less than a lot of the mainstream big TV advertising. And that was very targeted at the type of voter they felt they could bring to their cause. And what we're learning, I think, from this last election is that at the national level, at least, so much money is spent by both sides that the money in totals sort of cancel each other out. And it just underscores what a complete farce it is to see $16 billion wasted, in my opinion, on elections in this country.
Yeah, I'm happy to use the word farce, Frank. That's one of my favorite words. I'm sure. I think we need words which are more extreme than farce. It's an absurdity that so much, $16 billion was spent on an election, which didn't seem to have changed everyone's minds. As everybody knows, the vast majority of American voters anyway already knew who they were going to vote for, whether or not they see ads or not. And then that few 100,000 people in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, these were people who probably weren't affected in any way by advertising, probably more impacted by that clip of Trump working in McDonald's. Coming back to the money, does it really matter? I mean, the money is kind of just basically reinvested into the American economy. So people are either stupid enough or wise enough to donate some of their money to the Trump and Harris campaigns. Basically, what these people do is reinvest the money mostly in advertising. So does it really matter? Does the money disappear? Or I mean, it's not going into anyone's pocket.
You're absolutely right. From a macroeconomic point of view, you're right. The money just is good for the advertising industry. It's good for all of these campaign consultants who every 2 years get super rich from taking their slice of the commissions of all the cash that flows through the system. Yeah, it gets back into the economy, to be sure. But money can make a difference. And I think quite a few local elections, maybe state elections, Senate elections, the deployment of money, as we saw just now in November 5th, the deployment of money very strategically, very targeted, can actually, I think, make a big difference. What is also clear is that the egomaniacs who put in incredible amounts of their own money in order to get elected.
I mean, that's a four-letter word beginning with M when you're speaking of those egomaniacs. Elon Musk, of course, particularly comes to mind. Some people suggest that he actually, in his own weird or semi-autistic way, invested $40 billion in acquiring X and then using it as a vehicle to try and re-elect Trump. Whether that made any difference or not is also hard to quantify.
Actually, I was thinking, we'll come back to Musk, of course, but I was actually thinking of people like Michael Bloomberg last time round, who spent $1 billion to get 0 votes, or David Trone in Maryland.
That was a good investment, Frank, wasn't it?
Yeah, and David Trone in Maryland, who ran in the Maryland primary, put $60 million of his own money. He's the owner of a company called Total Wine. $60 million of his own money, 9 times that of his opponent.
He should have changed the name of his company from Total Wine to Total Waste.
Yeah, you're right. He lost completely. On the other hand, we saw a small group of very wealthy people involved in the cryptocurrency industry who put a very large amount of money in the last couple of weeks, few weeks, into a campaign in Ohio against incumbent Senator Sherrod Brown, the Democrat who had long wanted a lot of regulation of the crypto industry. And when you throw 40 million in the last minute, well, maybe it made some difference. I still think Brown would have lost because the tide in Ohio was certainly against the Democrats. But clearly it was strategically placed. It was placed with a very, very specific business goal in mind.
And you talk about Bitcoin, Frank. To me, that's another story that's not really being told coherently. The Bitcoin crowd certainly got behind Trump. Trump got behind Bitcoin. He's a major investor, speculator. Maybe that's too polite a word. As we speak, the week of Thanksgiving, Bitcoin is inching closer towards $100,000. It's boom times for Bitcoin, boom times for crypto. Crypto, of course, is a challenge to the centralized state, to the banking, the conventional 20th century financial system, which Trump is doubling down on in many of his appointments, appointing people, it would seem, who want to undermine the traditional state. So how does the Bitcoin narrative fit into this, and what's its place, particularly given so much of it is part of the dark web and we don't even know where the money is going and whose money it actually is?
Well, we've spoken before about Bitcoin. I've always believed that these cryptocurrencies are fundamentally a money laundering device. As you know, I focus particularly on international corruption as well as domestic here in the US. And we have found various different channels where cryptocurrencies have been used to finance terrorist organizations such as Hezbollah through a Russian exchange. Organized crime uses it. A lot of the people who originally started some of these crypto organizations were into high-level fraud, as we know from FTX and Bankman-Fried, who's now in jail. At the same time, the interest in acquiring an asset that people feel the government can't get hold of, that is somehow secretly hidden in deep vaults, I don't know, in outer space or somewhere, which is the myth, has led a lot of people on Wall Street to say, okay, we can make some money out of this. And they've built cryptocurrency exchanges. They've built investment funds for cryptocurrency. They've done a lot to publicize it. And the big fear that they've had is that it will be regulated by the government to the degree that the myth, the secrecy of crypto will suddenly blow up in their faces. Now, Donald Trump, along with, I think he learned this from Jamie Dimon of Chase Manhattan, JP Morgan Chase, who once said that crypto was a scam. That was the view of Donald Trump until clearly various people, including his son, Don Jr., came along and said, we can make a lot of money in crypto, and the people who support the crypto industry and want it to expand want to put money into your campaign. And suddenly, Donald Trump became a convert in support of cryptocurrencies. And now, those people who gambled on Trump in the crypto industry with very big investments in his campaign, they are now going to be rewarded. And then the prospect is a very light touch regulation by government. And that signal was the trigger for the latest huge surge in the value of Bitcoin.
Yeah, it reminds me of the dot-com boom of the 90s. It's always the kids who will lose the money when the thing collapses, as it inevitably will. The smart money, plus Don Jr. is not very smart, but probably surrounded by smart money people, will have made their money. I wonder whether there's a bigger story here, though, Frank. I know you sometimes listen to the show. You know I'm a little bit of a skeptic of all this hysteria about Trump as a fascist and authoritarian. I think that's nonsense. But I do think something very chilling is happening. Perhaps he is the first crypto president. Maybe not because he buys, literally or otherwise, the crypto lie. It's a scam, as you've noted, ultimately. But because this will be a presidency that will be attached to this sort of this decentralized fetish with finance. And the way, I mean, your book was called The Enablers, how the West supports kleptocrats and corruption endangering our democracy. The Trump administration, I think, will be an enabler of global kleptocracy, not just an enabler, but a participant, particularly in the way in which Bitcoin is becoming, this Bitcoin speculative mania is becoming central in its identity.
Well, you've just hit the nail on the head. And it's fascinating. Trump's largest financial asset, his largest personal financial asset, is that he owns about 65% of this publicly quoted company called Truth Social.
Yeah.
The ticker symbol is DJT, his initials. It's valued at about $7 billion today in the market. It has total revenues of $3 million. It has no profits. So anybody investing in Truth Social is investing essentially in the hope that Trump is going to make lots and lots of money in some other way than through his Truth Social social media. And what did Trump do last week? Truth Social registered to start a cryptocurrency trading company. And they are going to convert, to a large extent, the assets that they have, the capital, the shares they have in the market, to buying up crypto companies. Donald Trump will not divest his interest while he's president. He will continue to be the largest shareholder in this company with its expanding cryptocurrency interests. He will throw conflict of interest rules, norms, ethics out the window as he pursues this particular business. And his son, Don Jr., is in a multiple of related businesses as well. And frankly, what we have to worry about, deeply worry about, is the lack of conflict of interest supervision of the incoming administration, the crony capitalism gone mad.
Yeah, I mean, you need to make that crony capitalism gone mad is exactly what I would. That's my headline for this interview, and that should be the title of your next piece, or even a book. I mean, are the guys that you know? There are a series of excellent journalists, Frank, onto this. Couple of English journalists. I know you introduced me to an American one who came on the show. Are American journalists who have always been concerned about financial transparency and the increasingly kleptocratic nature of our world, are they onto this story? I don't read enough about it.
they are onto the story, but what frustrates me to some extent is that they do it story by story instead of putting these different stories together to see the bigger picture. I'll give you an example. There was an excellent story a couple of days ago in the New York Times about a meeting in Las Vegas.
Right. It's the Rockbridge Network. You mentioned
exactly.
that. Behind the scenes at a secretive gathering of rising MAGA donors.
Now, you think for a moment, why would Susan Wiles, who was the woman in the middle of your picture just now, she's the incoming chief of staff of Trump. You'd think she'd have more than enough to do in Mar-a-Lago with Trump, picking a new administration, getting themselves organized. What was she doing? Going to Las Vegas for meetings with who? With people like the
Mercer,
with
Rebecca Mercer, who's always been a major bankroller of Republican candidates.
Right, and trustee of the Heritage Foundation. Don Jr. was there. Don Jr.'s business partners were there, a man called Omid Malik.
Yeah, you told me about this guy, Malik. I'd never heard of him, but you say he's also a dark force behind a lot of this stuff.
Well, I don't know. He's got an investment firm in New York. I'm not quite sure what they do.
That's not very encouraging, Frank. You're not quite sure what they do.
No, but I can't cast aspersions. I have no evidence to suggest anything bad. His partner is a man called Chris Buskirk. I never heard of him, but he and J.D. Vance, the incoming vice president, are the founders of this Rockbridge network. They attracted people, a lot of young, very, very wealthy people from Silicon Valley and from the crypto industry as well. There are 150 of these millionaires who are members of Rockbridge, and I guarantee you, they want favors of one sort or another from the new administration. Their big contributions, like those of Musk, like those of the crypto people I've mentioned, all have one goal. If your candidate wins, you get access to the White House. And with access, you get influence. And that's the name of the game of money in American politics today.
Although, to be fair, I mean, Frank, that's a fairly traditional narrative. I mean, had Harris won, then the Reid Hoffmans of the world and the Mark Cubans would have had access to her administration.
Absolutely. Look, I'm not saying that this is a monopoly on the part of the Republican side. Everybody does it. Look, the largest single PAC, as far as I know, that was involved in the last election was actually a Democratic PAC, which raised about $570 million. 50 million came from Michael Bloomberg. It's on both sides. This last election saw $4.5 billion come from PACs, political action committees, from both sides of the aisle. People with a lot of money are investing or gambling, if you will, on a particular candidate to win. And if he does or she does, they get access, and that means influence.
And it's the betting markets and the political markets are coming together. I mean, huge amounts of money were won and lost in terms of betting on Trump as well. So it's not just the speculative investment in a Trump presidency, it's literal too. And of course, betting as a kind of addiction is increasingly a dominant industry.
But Andrew, think of the rate.
I'm just pointing out that betting has become almost like a national religion.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing, but just think of the rate of return. Elon Musk put in at least 120 million. He may have put in more into the Trump campaign,
which isn't a lot of money for him.
When Trump won, Tesla stock started to rise. By the end of the week, in other words, in 5 days, Musk's interest in Tesla had increased by $50 billion. That's, it's hard to grasp.
Well, it's not hard. It's impossible to grasp for mere mortals like ourselves. So let's stand back a little bit. you describe this as crony capitalism gone mad. America, in a sense, is being fleeced, I think, by this new administration. This is anything but Hitler. This is Don Jr. and a group of crypto speculators who are making a fortune out of the rest of the world. Is it almost as if, Frank, I'm just thinking out loud, you mentioned Sam Bankman-Fried. It's almost as if America elected Sam Bankman-Fried.
Well,
who's another smart guy and talks fast, and no one can quite understand what he's saying, ended up in jail. But and maybe ultimately Trump will end up in jail, but not because of the women he poured or the lies he told, but because of the billions of dollars he actually somehow, like Bankman-Fried, stole.
Well, I look at it a little differently. I look at it a bit generational. First of all, there are people who you don't see mentioned much in the press, like Nelson Peltz and Steve Schwartzman. These are the old guys who have been very close to Trump. They put a lot of money into Trump's campaigns, not just this one, but in previous ones. They have access at Mar-a-Lago. They have influence. We don't.
So that's the old Wall Street. Those are the old Wall Street guys,
right? And they are protecting their interests, just as the younger guys in the Rockbridge network are going to go after their interests. And what we are seeing now is this sort of generational divide. Trump's old cronies, they're going to pitch in, they're going to benefit, and then Don Jr.'s cronies, different generation.
So it's crony capitalism. It's old and young crony capitalism. Exactly. You haven't mentioned. I mean, it's a cast of characters. The Winklevoss twins, are they involved, Frank? In
Absolutely, this? They were at the Rockbridge meeting in Las Vegas. They're into crypto these days, and they're exactly the kind of people who must be overjoyed by the fact that their side won. Cryptocurrencies have gone through the roof. They've made a fortune before Trump has even been inaugurated. And then, Andrew, just to make it even better on crony capitalism, who's going to pay for the inauguration? Who is paying for the transition right now? Because Trump has decided he gets so much money from all these people who want influence, he doesn't need government funding. So he hasn't signed any of the ethics requirements that are normal for a transition.
So he's outsourcing the inauguration.
He's going to totally fund the inauguration in a way that we'll never find out who paid for it. And he's doing the same with the transition, because he could get $7 million from the government for the transition, paying for all the research, all the appointees, etc. Instead, he's doing it all by himself, and therefore not revealing anything about who these donors are. They are the dark donors to the Trump campaign that are doing something quite legal, but there is no reporting requirement.
Yeah, it's the biggest story of the election, and you seem to be, Frank, the only person actually telling it. In terms of these, and I've asked this before, but I come back to it in a more structural sense. Meanwhile, he's appointed Musk and other figures from Silicon Valley, like Travis Kalanick and others, I think Mark Andreessen, to investigate the efficiency of the state and perhaps to pick apart the traditional administrative 20th century state. Presumably, this is also bound up in this speculative mania that America is becoming, or DC, where you're talking to me from, is becoming kind of an outpost, not just of Silicon Valley, but of the internet, of the most decentralized dark web.
The biggest worry I have in this whole area of crony capitalism gone mad relates to our national security. And it's the area where Elon Musk has the greatest personal vested business interests. There is no question that the Pentagon, needs to find ways to make procurement spending much more efficient. We need huge amounts of new technology in the weapon systems that we develop. That seems to be agreed by the experts. It's almost a conventional wisdom. To do that, you have to make the Pentagon more efficient. We will find that many of the second, third, fourth tier civilian appointments to the Pentagon are people who are close to Elon Musk and recommended by him. And one of the worries that I have is not that he won't help to make the Pentagon more efficient, but that more and more contracts will go to his companies, SpaceX, for example. And we have to worry greatly about leaving so much responsibility for our national security to one, if I may say so, eccentric billionaire.
Yeah, and we've done shows on this. I mean, there's a new book out. It's actually on the FT Business Book of the Year list, short list. It's called Unit X. And it's about this, and this isn't just a Musk story. And I think there's a tendency to always get preoccupied with individuals. So it's all around Musk, or it's all around Trump, or Don Jr., or the Winklevoss twins.
Yeah,
but there's something structural going on as well. As the authors of Unit X know that the Pentagon and Silicon Valley, that the Pentagon invested in a new organization called Unit X, designed to take Silicon Valley technology to make themselves more efficient in war. And of course, AI is playing an increasingly central role in this too.
Oh, it's absolutely. And, you know, there are companies like Palantir and others that are.
And Palantir, of course, is Peter Thiel's company, which whose name was taken from Lord of the Rings, and these people's obsession with fantasy books like Lord of the Rings.
So my view is I'm not worried about relationships between the Pentagon and Silicon Valley. That can be to a tremendous benefit. What worries me is transparency and accountability. We need to see clearly who's getting the contracts, and we need to be assured that there is accountability on the part of those who are granting the contracts. We need a very strong inspector general at the Pentagon. And you remember that in Trump's first term, he tried to get rid of the inspectors.
Yeah, we've had inspector generals, and we know that the Trump administration will be the reverse of that. It will be the least transparent administration in American history.
So we have to be very worried about that, especially because we have a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican Supreme Court. And don't forget, in all of this, Trump, according to the Supreme Court, will have immunity from prosecution for so-called official acts. And nobody's defined an official act. And Trump will decide, I don't know, that when he does something on the part of the Truth Social company, it's somehow an official act. Or when he invites world leaders to Mar-a-Lago and charges them an arm and a leg, which he then cashes in on the cash. Well, that's perfectly legal.
But for me,
it's official. And it's small stuff that becomes big.
But I'm less concerned with that small stuff. I mean, so Trump makes a profit on all these government contracts.
But it sets a pattern, Andrew.
But the bigger picture, I've said this before, is this undermining of the Federal Reserve and of the architecture of traditional state finance. And if Bitcoin continues to rise, it becomes a rival to the dollar. And given the American debt, given the rise of China, the structural repercussions of this are very chilling. I mean, we don't quite know what kind of crisis could occur, but one will, because booms crazy booms like this are always followed by busts. It's just not clear what kind of bust would happen, because we haven't really experienced this kind of Bitcoin regime before, have we?
Well, many, many years ago, the Hunt brothers tried to corner the world's silver market and gold market. And we were very worried about what that.
Yeah, but they didn't run for office. We never had a president.
No, that's true. I'm just saying, But I don't think Bitcoin is that big yet. I don't see it becoming that big either. If we set it against other things, what worries me, and I think you've hit on it, the Federal Reserve being politicized and weaponized to support particular investment groups and so on, is that the fundamental issue of the independence of the rule of law is in great danger, because the checks and balances of the Constitution are being questioned simply because who is going to check all of this kind of behavior by Trump's mad cronies? And I worry about that, and I think everybody should. It's not a question of going into long rants about the end of democracy, but in terms of the damage that could be done to the fabric of our system of checks and balances and rule of law, and how that affects the economy and how it affects our security, are really serious issues that I don't see getting enough attention. They've been phrased in terms in the past, fascist this or whatever, but now we are actually looking at the emergence of an administration that has decided, for example, that the FBI as a whole is suspect, and therefore nobody seeking office should be vetted by the FBI. We're seeing new Attorney General come in with a mandate to basically replace all sorts of people in the Justice Department hierarchy with so-called loyalists. We have to worry about checks and balances and with the lack of transparency and accountability.
Yeah, things are changing dramatically. And I'm guessing, again, last time around when Trump won, everyone claims it was the Russians who organized it or paid for it. This time people aren't saying that. But I'm guessing that there is a weird kind of symmetry between what you call the crony capitalism that Trump now is developing, pioneering in the US, and the crony capitalism, the kind of narcoleptic state that Putin is building in Russia.
Well, it comes back to, the great service, Andrew, that you publicly do and others. The difference is Putin has completely quashed any free media, any free civil society, the result of which is that there is nobody in Russia who can question the tight system of intelligence services, political leadership, and oligarchs that are around Putin, and that he uses like the puppet master to, throw into any crisis, to manipulate others, and so on. Now, Donald Trump will still have to face, I think, a vibrant media, even though he'll try to quash it to some degree. It will be a vibrant media. We will have a vibrant civil society. And these are going to be more important than ever as the check on his power and ensuring the transparency that we need.
Yeah, and speaking of that media, I mean, that's in crisis too. There's even a rumor this morning that Musk might be buying MSNBC. God knows what he'd do with that. If he did the same as he'd done with Twitter, it would be also chilling, although I'm not a big fan of MSNBC either. So what can we all do? This is daunting. It's chilling. I think it's the real threat of this new regime. Historians will make sense of it better than we can because we're living through it. I know you're the co-founder of Transparency International, which is a public interest group focused on exposing some of this stuff. People should, of course, join or subscribe to Transparency International. But what else can we do, Frank? Ordinary citizens, non-billionaires.
We have to do everything possible to reach out to our congressmen and women, our senators on both sides of the aisle, to demonstrate that the public wants full transparency, it wants checks and balances, it wants accountability, that they should not confirm people to high office who haven't been thoroughly vetted, that our national security is at stake. If we don't believe in the democratic process working, even in a time like this, then I think it's a very sad day for America. So I would greatly encourage people to support all sorts of efforts and I don't see this as partisan, as reaching out to all of the elected members of Congress to say your duty is to be, as the Constitution said, the single most important arm of government, because you represent the citizens, and the citizens demand accountability right from day one from the new administration.
I take your point, Frank, but it's so depressing because, firstly, it's a Republican Congress. Secondly, most of the elected people, even if they were interested in understanding what was happening, don't have the intelligence or the information to do so. And thirdly, a lot of this is just taking. I mean, you noted the Rock Bridge network. It's not illegal. There's massive amounts of money sloshing around. You know, Musk spending hundreds of millions of dollars. It's like small change to him. I mean, he's worth. He'll probably become the world's first trillionaire. My sense on all this is going to end in a massive crisis of one kind or another, where it's a national security crisis, a war with China, some sort of nuclear accident or terrorism. This will end terribly. But we don't seem to have the tools to deal with it. So you're saying, yeah, write to your congressman, insist on your congressman. That doesn't work. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party, the good guys, I mean, I'm sure you and I are both on the progressive side of politics, are quite incapable of even coming up with a narrative to compete with this. We have a catastrophic Harris campaign, which wasted $1.3 billion or $1.65 billion on a dreadful campaign. I mean, someone has to come up with an alternative architectural narrative, don't they, Frank? As an alternative to Bitcoin, as an alternative to the crony capitalism that Trump and Don Jr. and Elon Musk and Omid Malik and J.D. Vance and the Winklevoss twins, they're selling to the American people.
The crazy thing, Andrew, is that we spend, and the media is spending so much time right now looking at all this crypto stuff. Meanwhile, the stock market is at a record high. The scale of public of individual investments in the regular stock market is thousands times as great as investment in Bitcoin. We may worry greatly about a stock market crash, but not because of Bitcoin, in my view.
Yeah.
I don't take the same disastrous view that you do, if I may disagree with you. But I think it's a long way back. But I think if the media and civil society and citizens organizations cannot focus on the issues that I've mentioned before of transparency and accountability, try to put the feet to the fire of members of Congress, then we have let ourselves down.
What's the point of being international stars?
Because I think sorry.
Those are the Trump people.
I think,
Frank,
I think
they're behind you. They're looking at what you're doing.
I think we need to ask every citizen, if they can, do something about this. Don't sit on your feet. Don't be complacent. It's very tough. I agree that the chances of doing something are slim. But I would also point out, Andrew, Donald Trump won this election by less than 1.5% of the popular vote. The margins in the states that you mentioned early in our conversation of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan were incredibly thin. If Harris had won just 230,000 votes, she would be the next president as a result of winning those states. So I don't quite see this situation as hopeless. I worry greatly that the public and the media is not focusing enough on the potential of crony capitalism doing enormous.
I agree with you, and I'm not celebrating a crash.
So we have to do more. We have to publicize this more, and that's why this show and this interview, I think, is very important.
No, well, I'm not agreeing on the show. I appreciate your kind words, Frank, but I do think this issue of crony capitalism and the financial or the financialized nature of this new regime, this is the real story. It's not about the end of democracy. It's about something much more, in an odd way, even more chilling. But we will see. We will stay in touch. Just to remind everyone, Frank is the co-founder of Transparency International. Anyone who cares about this shouldn't only write to their local congressman or woman, but should also contribute. Can they? It's a non-profit, Frank. So I assume you'd like a bit of cash, and you don't waste it like the Harris campaign, I hope.
No, we have even we're in 113 countries. And in the US, we have Transparency International United States. We can look it up on Google, and that is a 501(c). So I'm sure they'd love donations as well. Thank you very, very much. We are at a crossroads in many countries right now. Authoritarianism is gaining. We have to push as hard as we can on accountability of our governments.
No, that's good stuff, Frank Vogl. Always an honor. Fun to have you on the show. I think this is the most important story of the election. It's certainly a story that isn't being told enough. So I think it's important for you. You're the author of an important piece in US News. Money didn't buy Trump the election, but gets into the details of our weird financial world. Frank, we will stay in touch, and we will talk again in the not too distant future. One thing I think we can both agree on is this story is certainly not going away.
It's getting bigger. Thank you very much indeed for having me. Nice seeing you, Andrew. Thanks.